Hello, Hub City kids. How are you this week? Did you have a fantastic week? What is something good? You can pause the video, tell your family what is something good that happened to you last week. I got to play in the snow last week. I went to Sisters and I had such a good time playing in the snow, and it was very cold, but I enjoyed it. That's my good thing. So pause it, tell each other good things, because we want to remember who God is and what he's done for us, and that's the way to help us with our grumbling that we see the Israelites do all of the time, and we're going to hear more about that today. So much grumbling and complaining, and it's hard to remember who God is when we're just focusing on the things that he has failed us in. And that's what grumbling is. And they're things that we think he's failed us in, not things that he's actually failed us in. Do you remember what happened last week, the story that we read? There was a river, and it was 3 days after God parted the Red Sea and destroyed all of the Israelites' enemies and made this path for them. And then 3 days later, they're wandering around and they're thirsty. And they had just sang this whole song, worshiped together, and had this beautiful moment on the side of the Red Sea, praising God for all he'd done. And then they come to this little stream and they're like, we can't drink this water. It's awful. It tastes bad. Do something about it. I wish we were back on the other side of the Red Sea as slaves again. And they were grumbling and complaining and whining. And what did God do? He performed this crazy miracle. He said to Moses, here's a log, throw the log in the water. So Moses threw the log in the water, and what happened to the water? It became sweet. That is something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and not something that Moses did by himself, and something that we couldn't do. I guarantee that if you threw a log in some gross tasting water, it would not taste sweet afterwards. I don't recommend you trying it, but maybe just take my advice on that. So what did we learn from God in that whole story? We learned that God is in control of all of the things, because for some reason they can't remember that. If he can control a giant sea, then he can probably control a little stream. And we forget that all of the time. Remember, the Israelites, it's easy to judge them, but we are guilty of all the things that the Israelites do on a regular basis. And that story is kind of like the Red Sea, in that God did something to provide for his people that was beyond what they could have possibly imagined for themselves. Part of the reason they stood by that stream and complained was they didn't even think in their head that, I wonder if God could make this stream taste good afterwards, because that doesn't happen. There is no natural law that says that water just magically can turn into something that tastes good, especially back then. Now we could put like fruit or something in it, and that might change the taste, but definitely not a log. So God again showed them that he was even bigger than their wildest imaginings. We learned that God is the hero of the story. Moses threw that log in there, but Moses did not make the water sweet. We also learned that God can take bitter things and make them sweet. He can do that with water. He can also do that with things in our lives. Have you ever had something really hard happen in your life, and afterwards you can look back and say, wow, that was such a hard thing, but God did this and this and this, and he turned that bitter thing that still hurt and still was bad, but I can see that there are good things in that. I know that's happened in my life many, many times, that God can make something ugly out of something beautiful. The opposite of that. He can make something beautiful out of something that was ugly. He can make something sweet out of something that was bitter. Did you do that little activity where you put a cranberry or something gross tasting, and then you did something yummy tasting. It's kind of funny, huh? So, you would think that after this other miracle, that the Israelites would stop grumbling. What do you think? Do you think they did? Let's see. We are going to read Exodus 16 together today. And if you go to the description, I made a coloring page for you. I found a coloring page for you. I did not make it. And you can print that off while you're reading Exodus 16, because it's a whole chapter. And you can color it and keep your hands busy while you're listening. But then remember that you're going to pause the video, read Exodus 16, and then you are going to talk as a family about what you heard, what you remember, and what you learned from reading that. So ready? Pause. That was crazy because I covered my face, so you didn't even get a crazy face. So what did you hear? More grumbling. There is more complaining. This is halfway through the second month of them leaving Egypt. So 2 months have passed since God gave them water, since he parted the Red Sea, and they're weeks after they're on the side of that sea praising God for all of the things he's done. They have not gone thirsty because they had this sweet tasting water. And I'm imagining that when they were at that stream, they filled all of their buckets, they filled up all of their water bottles, everything they could. And now, the second it's run out, they're like, okay, now what? And they immediately go back to that thing they keep saying. They say, I wish we just have stayed in Egypt. At least in Egypt, we always had food to eat, we always had water to drink. Yeah, it doesn't matter that we were slaves, that the Egyptians were killing our children, that the second we asked to go away and take a break and worship our God, then you took away our key ingredients to making bricks, and we had to work harder, and we had to work to feed our family, and we were crying out with our deep soul sadness, God save us, God save us, God save us. But at least we had food and water all of the time. And they forgot all of those things and just had this kind of beautiful, rosy picture of what Egypt was like, and they're begging to go back. Kind of funny how they forgot all of the hard things that happened in Egypt and wanted to go back there, but also forgot all of the good things that God did for them. They're doing a lot of forgetting. So that's kind of ridiculous. I think it's kind of ridiculous that they wanted so badly to go back to that place. So what is God's response to that? Does he just say, okay, go ahead. If you want to go back, go back. Good luck getting across that sea that I parted for you the first time. That's not what he did. Just like he showed with the water that was made sweet, he provided for them. And he provided them in a way that was beyond any of their imaginings, beyond anything they could have possibly asked for. God started raining bread from heaven. Crazy. Have you ever seen bread rain down from heaven? It reminds me of that book, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. That's a fun book. And God takes care of his people by bread falling out of the sky. And when they wake up in the morning, there is enough bread for them to eat that whole day, all over the place. And all they have to do, they don't have to work for it. All they have to do is go outside, pick it up, and put it in their baskets. But there's a couple of things about that bread. Do you remember what they are? Could they save the bread? They couldn't. What happened if they kept bread and stored it in their tent to eat for the next day? It went bad. It was gross and moldy by the next day. Why do you think that is? If somebody was keeping bread till the next day, it was their way of telling God, I don't trust that you're going to provide for me. I don't trust that bread will fall the next day. I don't think that you can take care of me, so I'm going to take care of myself. And so God made it so the bread would not last till the next day. So those people knew that he was the one responsible for them. He was the one taking care of them. There was nothing that his people could do to take care of themselves. They were not the hero of their own story. God was the hero of their story. What else do we learn in this? What happens on the Sabbath day? Do you know what the Sabbath is? We've talked about it a little bit, and we'll talk about it some more. Sabbath is a day of rest. Normally, God's people celebrated Sabbath on Saturday, and typically we celebrate Sabbath on Sunday. And going to church is a part of that Sabbath. But it's a day that you set aside, that God demands that we set aside. He commands this of us, that we set aside a day where we don't work, that we rest, that we remember who God is and what he's done for us, and that we don't have to work so hard to earn his love. That's what Sabbath is. And so what does God do on Sabbath? He does not bring manna on the Sabbath day. He doesn't want his people to go out and even work so hard to collect that bread on Sabbath. He's showing us that he is taking a Sabbath too by sitting back and resting, just like in the Garden of Eden. God rested on the seventh day. That's that Sabbath. And so he's doing that with the manna as well. But does he just let them go hungry? Nope. He helps them plan ahead. So on the day before Sabbath, he brings twice as much bread. And so they can collect twice as much bread on that day, and it's not bad that night. So it lasts them through the next day. And it's God that's providing that, not them taking care of themselves. How is this different than Pharaoh? How is God different than Pharaoh? Did Pharaoh let the Israelites rest? No. Pharaoh was a master, a slave master. He owned those people, and he made them do what he wanted them to do. They had to provide their own food. They had to make enough things to please Pharaoh and do all the things and earn all of what they needed and earn Pharaoh's protection. And as soon as Pharaoh was threatened by them, what did he do? He hurt them. He killed babies, innocent babies, because he was worried that the Israelites would overthrow his kingdom. Is that what God does? No. He brings the Israelites out of Pharaoh's kingdom, out of Egypt, and brings them into his own kingdom, where he gives them freedom. He protects them, he gives them food, and he gives them rest. He says, I brought you out because I love you for who you are, even when you grumble, when you complain, when you forget. I still love you, and I'm still going to take care of you. I'm going to give you rest because that's what's the best for you. And in that gives you time to remember who I am. And I want you to take that time to glorify me and to remember me. But if you're working all of the time, you can't remember who I am and what I've given you. There's nothing that we can do to earn God's love, or God's saving. He saves us. There's nothing that we can do to earn that. And the harder we work, really the easier it is to forget who the hero of our story is. And God sets aside a day for us to sit back and just rest in knowing that he loves us for who we are, not what we can do. So what does this teach us about God? He loves us, right? No one would put up with the amount of grumbling and complaining the Israelites do and we do without loving us so much that they're willing to listen and take care of us after that. And he can take care of us. He takes care of us beyond our wild imaginings. He gives us food when we need food. He gives us protection when we need protection. And most importantly, he gives us freedom from slavery when we need freedom. He wants us for who we are, not what we can do for him. We are saved from what God has done, not from what we have done. God's people couldn't feed themselves in the desert, so God did it for them. There's a story right after this one with the manna that God has Moses strike a rock and water comes out of the rock. He provides them water and food when they ask for it. Actually, when they demand and complain about its lack of it. He provides it for them when they don't even know that they need to ask him. God is the hero of this story, not Moses, not the Israelites, and definitely not us. So spend some time, if there's anything else in this passage that you've learned about God as a family, spend some time thinking about that. Spend some time talking about what this teaches about us as well. I know it's easy for me to read this and think of how many times I complain and argue and grumble and to start feeling bad about myself. But that's not how we should read this story. Instead of reading that, we should read it as God loves me enough to take care of me even when I do that. So, have a fantastic week, Hub City, and I hope I will see you all again next week.